Hi, folks. We're honored to bring you our final Pitbull series episode with the photographer and artist, Sophie Gamand. We're actually going to be giving away in the next few days a 5-pack of animal rescue themed books, including Sophie's award-winning book, Wet Dog. Go to thisispawprint.com/giveaway for more details. If you happen to be in the New York City area, on Wednesday, September 21st through September 25th in Brooklyn, Sophie will be presenting Flower Power at Photoville. You can go to photoville.com to learn more. And during that time, Sophie will be launching her Pitbull Flower Power calendar. You can also learn more by going to thisispawprint.com. Thanks, and on to the show.
We've reached a point where people don't even know what a pit bull is, but they know it's that scary thing in the back of their head. I wanted to give these dogs their dignity back.
This is Paw Print, an animal rescue community, episode 74, and the final episode of our Pitbull series. I'm Harold Ree.
And I'm Nancy Ree. Today's guest is Sophie Gamand. Sophie is an artist in New York City, best known for her dog photography through her award-winning book, Wet Dog, and her easily recognizable photos called Pitbull Flower Power. Sophie talks about her journey as an artist, along with her own experience in animal rescue. If you want to learn more about Sophie Gamand, Wet Dog, and Pitbull Flower Power, go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/74. That's the number 74.
I see myself as an artist who has been able to develop a voice in the rescue community, which allows me to spread awareness on subjects that I find really, really interesting and important. So it all started a little bit like, not by accident, but when I moved to the U.S. a few years ago, in New York specifically, I didn't know anybody here. I left my life in Europe, and I started taking photos of dogs, I think, as a means to touch with people around me, but I was a little shy, without having to talk to people so much, so I would photograph the dogs instead. And very quickly it became an obsession for me. And I discovered a huge amount of animals and dogs that are in shelters in America. Obviously, it's such a big country here. Your numbers are really shocking when you come from a country like France or a small country in Europe where we don't have that many homeless pets. Here, the numbers really struck me, and I thought, okay, I have this passion to take photos of dogs, and I have the skills for it. Maybe I could apply that and try and maybe make a tiny little difference for shelter dogs, because there is hundreds of thousands, millions of them in the shelter system. So that's how my journey in photographing shelter dogs started.
Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about your latest project called Flower Power? And of course, it's in its own way, it's kind of, what do they say? It's kind of gone viral, right?
Yes. I think what happened with Flower Power goes back to my first really big successful project called Wet Dog, which is a series of dogs looking completely miserable during bath time. That was the first series that went viral, and I won awards, and I became really known for that project, which opened the door later for me to have a very successful release of my project Flower Power. Flower Power it started as an art project about pit bulls in shelters. So I had been volunteering as a photographer in shelters and with rescues for a few years, and I was always a little, tensing up around pit bulls. First, I was attacked by a big dog when I was a teenager, so that kind of left me a little nervous around large, energetic dogs. And in shelters, pit bulls often have high energy because they're locked in a cage all day long, and their dogs that need a lot of exercise. They have a lot of energy that they need to spend, playing and running around, and they don't get to do that a lot in kennels. So whenever they would bring the pit bulls on the set, I would always tense up a little bit. And then one day I just thought, I need to snap out of this. These dogs have never done anything to me, and I see a lot of them in shelters, and so I figured I'm going to use my photography and my art to see if I can challenge myself to see pit bulls in a different way. Instead of approaching them with fear and apprehension, I wanted to approach them with an open heart, an open mind, and see if I could just change my relationship to them. And that's kind of how the project started. So I was thinking, how can I photograph pit bulls in a way that hasn't really been done before, or in a way that would completely reverse the perception we have of them? And that's when I had the idea of building flower crowns and bringing flower crowns to shelters and photograph pit bulls who were waiting for adoption wearing flower crowns in like the super soft, feminine light and beautiful, colors, and something very soft, very dreamy and non-threatening in a way. Yeah. So that's how it started. And at first I thought, I'm just going to do a few images. It's going to be a quick summer project. It'd be fun to glue, flower crowns together and just have fun with it a little bit. I don't think I had realized how big the project was going to be, and that from basically overnight almost, I was propelled into the role of a pit bull advocate, where everybody thought this is this new voice in pit bull advocacy. Everybody thought my flower power project was going to change the game, and I got a lot of hate mail, I got a lot of love mail, and all of a sudden I became this pit bull advocate where in the first place, I was not a big fan, and I was not very comfortable around these dogs. So it's been a very, very interesting journey.
Sounds like really the initial kind of spark was really kind of challenging your own fear.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think as humans, that's something that's so important. You have to challenge yourself in life. And I think hating and being afraid are the easiest feelings to have. If you really challenge yourself and you try to face your fear and you try to overcome things, that's when you can better yourself. That's when life becomes interesting. And I'm somebody that's always been shy and a little fearful socially. And I reached an age where I thought I could continue living my life like this, or I could kick myself in the butt and just face things that challenge me. Pit bulls were definitely one of them. I never thought, when you're a little worried around big dogs and then you have to tie a flower crown around their head, I don't know if you realize, but you're basically a couple of inches away from their face. And they're shelter dogs who have, heavy pasts sometimes, and they've been abused or severely neglected. So they're really dogs that you would expect to be, in a way, the worst. If you're somebody that doesn't know much about shelter dogs, obviously, I don't think they're the worst, but if you go and see a shelter pit bull, you probably think, oh my God, this dog has been through so much. It's probably going to be aggressive and fearful. So there I am with my little flower crowns, tying something around a dog's head, a dog that doesn't know me and might have a heavy past. So it was a crazy idea. The first crown I tied on that dog, I still remember how it felt, and my hands were shaking, and I'm like, this is the stupidest idea I've ever had in my life, Right. And her name was Baby. She was from a shelter here in New York. And I tied a crown around her very quickly, and I could barely breathe, and I just backed and I grabbed my camera and I turned around and I thought, she's probably just knocked the flower crown down and eating the flowers. And I looked at her and she was just sitting there, very peaceful and very dignified. And she just looked at me, with a face that kind of questioned me, like, what? Why are you so nervous? What's happening? There was something so calm in her face. And I took photos, and right there and then I knew this project was going to be more than just portraits of dogs wearing flowers. There was something so poignant. Yeah. And then I started doing research. I started doing research about pit bulls in America, and I discovered how many we euthanize and how many are stuck in the shelter system. We euthanize between 800,000 and 1 million pit bull type dogs every year in America. It's huge. And when you hear these numbers, it's almost 1 million dogs that are just killed for no reason. Most of these dogs are great dogs that the only fault is to be a pit bull type dog and to be part of a group or to look like they belong to a group. That scares people.
How comfortable or how uncomfortable do you feel? You've sort of been thrown in to, as you say, you're almost like unofficially now this pit bull advocate. How do you feel about that?
Every once in a while, I do get a little, what's the word? I have to do a little introspection every once in a while, because obviously when you're in the position that I am in, and I work with a lot of rescues and shelters, and I see a lot of pit bulls, and I help promote their adoption, and I see the success stories, and I see these dogs blossoming into adoptive families. So when you're caught in that system, you lose touch with how can people be afraid of them, because you're so used to seeing those amazing dogs that you lose the connection to the hate group of people that hate pit bulls. And every once in a while I get hate emails or comments on my social media pages where people share articles or, those stats that we've all heard about on the bite accidents and involving pit bull type dogs and things like this. So every once in a while I have to question myself and really assess how comfortable I feel about that. And is it okay to, I don't feel like I'm promoting pit bull. I think I'm promoting fair treatment of pit bulls. And I'm always very careful in the way I answer interviews and the way I talk about my work. I'm not saying everybody should get a pit bull. They're great, easy dogs. Yoo-hoo, That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying if we want to be a humane society, we need to start treating animals better. And if there is one animal that deserves amazing treatment, it's dog, because we have created dogs. We're responsible for them. We invented dogs. We shaped them. We created breeds. We taught them everything they know. So that really gives us a responsibility towards them. So my whole idea is to say, whether or not you like pit bulls, the only fact that we euthanize so many of them in our shelters should awaken you.
In California, pit bulls are very, very common. And in our local county shelter, if you go to their website for available dogs, if there are 7 pages of dogs that are available, 6 pages are pit bulls, pitty mixes. How about in New York City? Are pit bulls the most common ones that end up in the shelter?
Oh, yeah. Maybe around 80-85%. I'm just guessing, but
so it's way above half.
I think that's a national average, actually. Because, if you look at statistics, we euthanize 1.2 million dogs every year in America, and about 1 million of them are considered pit bull type dogs. Mm-hmm. So, what's difficult with pit bulls too is that there is no specific definition of what a pit bull is. It's a group of breed. It's a group of dogs that kind of look like this. So very often first they're mislabeled, or, I've heard amazing stories. For example, a recent story that really stuck with me, it was from a shelter manager that said, they're in a tiny town and they get pit bulls there, and the local population is not exactly a pit bull owner type of population. So when they get pit bulls, they get stuck in the system for a long time. And she said once this woman came with her daughter and they were looking to adopt a dog. And the woman came and said, I'm looking for a family dog. I want a dog that's friendly, and she described all the qualities she wanted in a dog. And instantly the shelter manager is like, I have a perfect dog for this. It's exactly the match to what you're describing. And the mother said, great, we're open to anything. The only thing we don't want is a pit bull. So the shelter manager was like, well, let me get that dog that I know is a great match for you. And she got that little dog from the kennel. The dog met the mother and the daughter and covered them with kisses. And the daughter fell in love. And the mom was like, oh, my God, this dog is amazing. And the shelter manager turned to her and said, I'm glad you have such a connection with that dog, but unfortunately, she's a pit bull. Mm. And the mom could not believe it. She said, what do you mean a pit bull? No, that's not a pit bull. And that's the thing. When I'm talking about the mythological creature that pit bulls have become, that's what I'm talking about. We've reached a point where people don't even know what a pit bull is, but they know it's that scary thing in the back of their head that you can't approach, you can't interact with.
Right.
And I think that's why when people tell me, oh, no, people are horrible, they shouldn't be around, I'm like, have you volunteered in a shelter? Have you fed? Have you walked a pit bull ever in your life? Because if you have, you won't be able to think like this anymore. Mm. Again, hating is easy because it's based on ignorance most of the time. Right. And so, this is a story that I think is so fascinating because it really, really shows the situation we have now in our shelters. Yeah. How easy it would be to fix, in a way.
When I look at your beautiful photos, you, of course, have the flower crown. You often have a very pastel type of background. When you're in a sort of a cold shelter, it can probably look a little bit like a strange sight. What's been the response?
Yeah.
And you know what, Sophie,
Yeah.
I showed your flower pictures to my sister yesterday, and she said, "Are you sure that's not CGI? Because it just looks so natural and so well blended."
Well, basically, I use professional lighting, so I never rely on natural light, which helps a lot because that means I can photograph from anywhere in the shelter. And like you suspect, I often work in the most unlikely places, a little corner in the kitchen or in the office space or wherever I can set up a tiny little studio. So I bring my own backdrops and I use artificial light, which helps. And then also, although the dogs really wear the flower crowns, I do a lot of digital painting on top of my images to create the final look.
Mm.
That was an aesthetic that I chose very early on in the project because I wanted to kind of convey the idea of nostalgia. I wanted those to look like faded vintage photographs or artworks, almost like colorized images. And my idea was to really think about pit bulls as something we are losing, something, not an endangered species necessarily, but one that could be.
Right.
Give us a few more decades of this and more, cities doing BSL, breed-specific legislation and banning breeds. And before we know it, they might become an endangered species. And I think that's interesting. So that was kind of the look I was going for with these images. But yes, I do have to set up, studios in, usually little dark corners. And then just to talk about the process, and I just rely on the shelter staff and the rescuers usually to handle the dogs and assist during the shoot. So it's a great experience for everybody involved. I can't tell you how many times the shelter staff, comes to me and thanks me and say, this is amazing, like spending the day just hanging out with our dogs and doing something that's fun and beautiful and that will have beautiful results. And just also challenging their dogs into sitting and posing and all that. It's a great experience for the dog. It's a great experience for the staff and the volunteers who don't often have those quiet times where they get to hang out with their dogs. So it's really it's interesting. When I think if any photographer listens to this podcast, I would definitely encourage them to try and volunteer with animal shelters or whatever else. It's such a beautiful gift to yourself, to your art, but also to the people involved. I have rescuers thanking me with tears in their eyes, and then when they see the photos, they're so happy to see the animals in that beautiful light. It's very dignified. And that was something that was important to me, too, when I started a few years ago. I wanted to give these dogs their dignity back. My idea was these dogs are transitioning from a life of neglect, abuse, or just losing their owner. So many reasons why dogs end up in shelters. I wanted to capture that moment where they transition into their new life. And when they come from horrible situations, I wanted to give them dignity back.
Where did you grow up? How did you come to the United States?
Yeah.
And did you have animals growing up? When you were growing up, did you have animals?
I was born in France and I grew up there. And I always had pets. So I grew up with two sisters, German short-haired pointers, who were fighting like crazy. They were very jealous. And, if you gave a little piece of bread to one and not the other, you opened the gate of hell. So it was quite interesting. So I grew up with very jealous sisters and bunnies. I had a bunch of different animals. One of my favorite was snails. Each time it would rain in my parents' garden, I would go pick up big snails and just watch them and then release them a few days later. I was always super interested in animals. And I wanted to become a vet at some point growing up. And I had my first camera, I think I was probably about 10. And when I look at old photos I took back then, it's interesting because I was actually doing a lot of animal portraiture, which I never thought since then. I never thought about it since then. So it's interesting going through all negatives from back then, seeing a lot of portraits of my dogs and animals in general. I would go to the zoo too and take photos of the animals. I think for me, portraiture was always a very intimate way to connect with the subject without having to communicate and talk and engage. So I would always take photos from candid shots, from a distance. That was, it's interesting when I go back to old photos to see that I already had that a little bit. But then I was very artistic, but I didn't take an artistic path because I had a daddy that thought I needed a real job. And I was pretty good at school. So I actually ended up studying law. So I have a master in law, which is weird because I basically spent 5 years of my life studying law and writing cases. And I specialize in art law, which today actually helps me a lot.
So you specialize in artistic law or art law?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough that the fifth year of my studies, I was like, oh, what am I going to do? I was interested in becoming a diplomat maybe at some point. And so I was interested in international law. And then luckily that fifth year, they actually opened a brand new section in my university in France that specializes in artistic law. So that covers, gallery work. And there's a lot of interesting things to be studied in that department. So that's what I specialize in. It allowed me to, leave law and go back to art, really. So after 5 years of being a good student, I turned around and I said, well, I think I really want to go back to art. But still, I got a job. I got a job in a UN organization. I did that for a few years. And in parallel to that, I was very unhappy. I was working behind a desk, office hours, which was killing me. I hated the whole process. So in parallel to that, I started singing opera. So I started training to become an opera singer. And I also started my own photography magazine, just interviewing artists and the whole editorial world, which was so exciting and interesting. So I was like, I could become an art journalist. I was the chief editor of the magazine. Or I could become an opera singer. At that point, I didn't really know. And then I met a man. And that's when everything changed. We were both living in Switzerland at the time, but he didn't speak French and I didn't speak his language, Swedish. So we figured, let's move to a country where we both speak the language. And so we moved to New York. Very long story short. And that's how we ended up in New York in 2010. In New York, basically, it was a clean slate in New York. It was like, okay, here, I don't see myself becoming an opera singer because there's a lot of singers on the market in New York. And I didn't have that competitive, spirit in me for that kind of stuff. So I gave up singing. And then I gave up my magazine because it was French. And it's hard to direct a magazine from New York when the magazine is based in France. So I basically had to reinvent myself, which was very stressful and scary, but one of the most amazing blessings I've ever had in my life, because I was really able to do a clean slate. And because I was far from my parents and, where you grow up, you don't have that pressure of what people expect you to be. So all of a sudden, it's like, you know what? Everybody wants me to be an opera singer because I have a great voice. Maybe I don't want to be an opera singer anymore. And because you're so far, geographically and time-wise, and you're so remote from your roots, in a way, it's easier to let go of these burdens.
Right.
And really find your true voice.
I'm sure there are some folks listening to this interview who are artists. What kind of advice would you give to them in light of all the great variety of experiences that you've had?
So much I could talk about. The first thing that comes to mind, I think, is when you're an artist, you have intuition. That's what it means to be an artist, is basically that you have a very acute intuition. What fascinates me is when I look at, for example, at my personal journey, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, when I was a kid, I knew already where the truth was, where my truth was. It was with animals, it was with art, it was with portraiture, I had a strong sense of justice. So all these things were already there. And it took me, a lifetime to go back to them. And now that I'm finally back to them, I'm so grateful for all the experiences I had in the meantime. Obviously, a journey is a journey, But now I'm like, wow, it's crazy to think those intuitions I had as a kid and how true to myself they were. And I think a lot of artists that are not happy in their personal or in their professional or personal life haven't found a way to reconnect to that intuition. Because it's difficult, because you have to pay bills, you have, kids, a husband, a wife, there's a lot going on in life. But if you're able to find that spot and reconnect with that intuition, that original, intuition, it's the most powerful thing. And I am so grateful, for Wet Dog that allowed me to have a voice in the dog community, which later led to Flower Power being so successful, to be able to make your art, pay your bills with your art and save lives or feel like your art is meaningful, it's the best feeling in the world. And I don't know where, my next steps are going to take me. I don't know where all this is going to go. But right now, I'd say I'm in a pretty good place as an artist and as a person. I feel very fulfilled. So I'd say that, artists, just try and connect to that intuition, that source of it all.
Right.
Sometimes it's in your childhood, but, it's a very, very powerful thing.
So do you have any pets of your own now?
Oh, I actually don't have pets.
Oh, really? Wow.
Well, first, in New York, you get a lot of buildings that do not allow pets. So unfortunately, when we moved here, we didn't know. We didn't really think about it. And the market here is so hard. When you find an apartment, you don't hesitate, So our first apartment didn't allow pets, which was very frustrating. And then a few months ago, we moved in a new place that allows pets. But my husband is a cat person, and I'm obviously a dog person. So we figured, let's not jump into any long-term commitment. So what we've been doing is fostering, basically. So we've been fostering only dogs so far, but I keep promising my husband will foster a cat soon.
I think that's the best situation because we have 3 dogs, and we still foster, but if I could do it over...
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, if I could do it over, I would only foster. Maybe I might have 1 dog, but I would only foster so that I can save more animals. So you're in the best situation.
Funny, I always said with my job, I'm like the grandparents. I see the kids on the weekend, but I don't have to clean up their mess all week long. So when I do photo shoots, I hang out with the dog. I get the best of everything.
Right.
So with fostering, I feel like it's the same thing. It's a great way, like you say, to save lives and help. So it's very important, especially since so many rescues don't have a physical shelter.
Exactly.
And they really rely on their foster network. So fostering is an amazing gift for them. But also, I travel a lot and I'm home a lot, which is great to get foster animals, but I can't really commit to a long-term relationship with a pet because I travel, I'm going to be in France for a month and a half probably this summer. Like everything is a little tricky. So fostering is great. You just have to find a rescue or a shelter that you and you're very comfortable with them, and you know that they're reliable. And I found a great group here in New York that I foster for, and it's been really amazing. And so we fostered a lot of pit bulls, puppies, and I'm getting my new foster today, actually.
Oh, great.
I'm very excited. Yeah, he's a tiny little pit bull who's deaf.
Oh.
So he's like a cute little nugget. He has like an ear infection, so they might be able to, they don't know if he's deaf by nature or if it's just because he has really bad ear infection. So we're going to put little eardrops and see where that goes. He's tiny, teeny. I think he's like 24 pounds. Super, super cute. So I can't wait to meet him. And we're probably not going to have him for long because everybody wants to adopt him already. So
You've encountered tons and tons of dogs. But are there any particular animal stories that inspired you?
Stories that showed me that my work really made a difference, because when you're a volunteer, whether, you just clean kennels in a shelter or you foster or you take photos for a rescue, you never really know the difference you make. It's very hard. It's kind of a blind... you kind of know that you're helping, but it's also a very blind. Like you don't really have those specific stories to hang on to. So for years, I photographed dogs in shelters thinking, I think it helps adoption, but I'm not sure. I have a few stories where I know it actually really made a difference. And those are the stories that, touch me the most because they're the ones that keep me going. For example, recently I was in Arizona in Phoenix. I went to a shelter that takes a lot of cruelty cases, and they work with the sheriff's office. They're part of the sheriff's office there. So, they get a lot of dogs that are seized in animal cruelty cases, dog fighting rings, and things like this. And years ago, the team didn't have dog training. Like, they didn't really know how to take care of animals. It was set up as a program, but, they were not really, they didn't have the tools, I think, to really help the dogs overcome their issues. So when I visited them, they had a new team, they have dog trainers, they're doing great work. But they still have these long-timers that had been there for 9, 10 years. So I took photos of them, and it was so sad because these dogs, when you spend 9 years in a shelter, it's not a fun place to be, and even though they get out a little bit, they don't have exposure to a lot of the outside world. So they tend to shut down, and it's very difficult. I photographed one dog there that was seized actually from a famous rapper who had 12 pit bulls that he was, they were very neglected. She was very underweight, and she was probably beaten up a lot. So she was seized almost 10 years ago. So I shot her again, and I shot her story, and it went a little viral. People got vested a little bit, and she was adopted 3 days later.
Oh, wow.
After 9 years in the shelter. And the people just saw the photo on the feed, and they knew that shelter, so they were kind of looking already, and they wanted to give a chance to a senior dog. And so they, it was just the timing, I think, was great. And the photo maybe helped, catch their interest. So I have a few stories like this of long-timers, and I know the photo made a difference. And that's pretty special,
In the beginning of Wet Dog, in the introduction, I really like that one paragraph where you talk about how dogs often fill a role for people that other humans no longer can. That whole paragraph is just, it's so true and it's so beautiful. Can you talk a little more about that?
It's not ownership, it's relationship.
Exactly,
I think.
exactly.
Yeah. It goes back to what I was briefly mentioning earlier. I really feel like men created dogs. And in a way, it's almost in the same manner that God created men created dogs. So it's interesting. It's an interesting circle. We created them for our needs, to fulfill needs. We created them for companionship, for partnership, to help us hunt, to guard our homes, or to just, hang out with us in a little purse while we walk around New York. We create breeds and we teach skills to dogs, how to lead the blind and sniff for drugs in airports. Our relationship with dogs is so unique. There's no other partnership like this between species, interspecies, relationship like this. I think it's fascinating. The fact that we shaped dogs completely is also an interesting fact because that means they reflect on us. What dogs are and what dogs do reflect on what kind of humans we are, what kind of society we are. And so I always say, dogs kind of hold up a mirror to our humanity and the way we treat them, whether it's by treating them like gods almost, dressing them up and paying thousands of dollars in grooming and accessories, or whether we abuse them, train them to fight each other, or even if we eat dogs, all these relationships we have with dogs, I think, speaks volume about the kind of people we are and the kind of society we are. To me, that's the key. That's the center of my photography explorations. It's really, to observe that. And through dogs, I try to understand humans better and understand our mechanisms. And actually, a lot of people that are in rescue tend to lose faith in humanity, and it's difficult when you see so much horror all day long. It's difficult to keep an open mind about people. As for me, I really try to always understand because it's not dogs against humans in cases of abuse and shelter animals being dropped and all that. It's never that humans are just monsters that want to hurt animals. I think it's much more complicated than that. So when I observe shelter animals and when I hear their stories, I also try to think about, what is it that we do between us humans to each other that leads humans to turn against dogs? Because the only reason why a guy is abusing a dog or, forcing a dog to fight another dog, it's because that guy has been failed by society at some level, It hasn't been taught the proper empathy tools and compassion towards all beings. It's not just his fault, it's society's fault. It's how you grow up and the environment you grow up. So I think as rescuers and people who are involved in animal advocacy, it's always important to remember that that, we also have to look out for our peers, and our peers are humans. So as much as we love dogs and animals, the human species is also important and should be important. But it's easier to love on a dog that's going to give you unconditional love all the time than it is to love on humans that are so difficult to deal with. So that's, I think, what I'm trying to expose myself to when I photograph dogs. I really try to expose myself to humanity and how the hell do you handle people.
What's next for Flower Power? I mean, I know you have a calendar, but what's the next sort of stage for Flower Power? And then number two, what's the best way for people to look up Sophie Gamand, whether it's social media, whether it's your website?
Yeah. So Flower Power, I've been doing it for 2 years now. I'm going to celebrate the second anniversary this summer. So it's been 2 incredible, intense years. As an artist, I'm itching to work on new projects, but I also recognize that this project almost goes beyond me and my needs because it's so popular. I've done over 250 portraits in the series. It's become a tool for advocacy. So many people rely on this project that I don't feel like I can stop just yet. So I'm hoping maybe to make a book. So I'm actually talking to my publishers and just starting the process to see if we could make a book with Flower Power. I've started traveling to other states to gather stories of pit bulls from across the country a little bit. And, everywhere around the country, I see the same stories, really, of neglect and abuse and people being afraid and these dogs paying the price, for just the way they look. So it's an interesting journey. And so, Flower Power is probably going to continue for a little while. And I'm not sure, but it's a great tool. So I have to keep working on it. Yeah. And the best way really to follow my work, I say social media is definitely a great place. Instagram in particular has been really good to me. I have over 125,000 followers on there.
All right.
Which means I'm actually getting dogs adopted now. So when I post dogs, usually the shelter and the rescues very often they get applications. And I've gotten a lot of dogs adopted through my Instagram. So it's been a very good platform to advocate and to get dogs adopted. And I post most of my work there. So you get your daily fix of cute dogs and amazing stories. My account is @Sophie Gamand. So that's my first and last name. Facebook also, Sophie Gamand Photography is my account, and I share a lot of the stories there as well. And my website is www.sophiegamand.com, so people can find links to my stores. And I have my wet dog book, I have calendars, I sell prints and products to support the Flower Power project. Since, I never charge, obviously, for a photo shoot. And most of the time, I photograph for shelters for free. So buying prints, calendars, and merchandising really helps me fund the project and continue doing what I'm doing.
If other animal shelters wanted to kind of borrow your idea of the Flower Power, would that be okay?
A lot of people have, jumped on the project the past couple of years, and I get a lot of emails from people asking me if it's okay. So usually what I say, every artist has their own comfort zone. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's totally fine if people want to use flowers with dogs to help promote them. The only thing that I ask is that they respect my artistic boundaries, so they do not try to reproduce my style, with the little paint effect and the cropping and composition of the images and the light. Just try to find your own interpretation of the flower theme, I think, is more respectful. Mm-hmm. And I also ask that they don't call it Flower Power, or they find their own title, right, so it doesn't confuse everybody. But that being said, the art project that Flower Power once was really became a campaign under the hashtag Pitbull Flower Power. So I have a lot of people that share their own photos of their dog with flowers to support the campaign on Instagram and on Facebook, but mostly Instagram, using the hashtag Pitbull Flower Power. And if you check that hashtag on Instagram, you'll see tons of really fun photos of people, doing their own take and helping spread awareness and the word about pit bulls and rescue dogs and all that. So it's been fun.
Thank you, Sophie, for all that you do. Your photographs are beautiful. We definitely recommend people not only check out Flower Power, but go purchase a copy of Wet Dog. It's definitely that by itself is a beautiful book as well. So
yeah, and I can't wait for the Flower Power book. I'm really looking forward to that one.
Oh yes, me too. I just have big plans for it, so I need to find I need my publisher to be on board and all that. It's a slow process, but I want it to be a big, beautiful book, and I'm really working hard already towards that goal. So stay tuned. Hopefully next year or something.
If you could wave that magic wand and fix something about animal rescue, what would you try to change?
I think I would try to teach compassion to every human being on Earth, and I would want to teach them to love themselves. We're never loved. We're never, listened to. So for me, that's kind of, if I had a magic wand, I would make sure everybody on Earth knows that they're special and they're worth something and they are loved, and they're important and they matter. And I think if you solve that, you solve every issue we have on the planet, including animal abuse.
We want to say thank you to Sophie Gamand for sharing her story and for shining a beautiful spotlight on pit bulls and really helping save some lives. As I mentioned before, if you're in the New York City area, this week is Photoville in Brooklyn. From September 21st through 25th, you can see Sophie's solo exhibit, and she's also launching her Pitbull Flower Power calendar. You can learn more by going to thisispawprint.com/74. If you'd like to meet me or Nancy on social media, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, look for This Is Paw Print, all one word. If you'd like to listen to more episodes of Paw Print, you can go to your favorite podcast app like iTunes, SoundCloud, or Pocket Casts. Make sure to hit subscribe to get the latest episodes immediately. We just want to say thank you for supporting us during our Pitbull series. 7 amazing episodes. Make sure to take a listen to all 7. We just want to say thanks for sharing Paw Print with your friends and family. And remember, you spread a positive message of love and peace by saving an animal. Have a great day, everyone, and see you next time on Paw Print.
Paw Print is a production of EVER Education.
You can't handle the truth.